about breakthroughs, discoveries, and the future of Alzheimer's research. Some of the topics we're going to discuss tonight revolve around convening the scientific community, updates in prevention and treatments, and the hope that's on the horizon. We're going to start by asking each panelist to begin with some opening remarks. So Dr. Appleby, what exciting advancements are happening in Alzheimer's and dementia research locally, and how might those advancements impact diagnosis, treatment, and care?
Well, first, thanks for having us. Greatly appreciate it. I think first I'm going to start off with what I'm excited about the field in general, and then we'll dive down into local. Has anyone ever heard of Moore's Law, or the law of accelerating returns? So it's gotten very popular lately because of AI, but essentially the basis of it is that there is exponential growth of technology and science. And I think that's kind of what we're starting to see in this field of Alzheimer's disease. We've kind of hit that hockey stick. I'm very involved in another disease called prion disease. And to be honest, it's very rapidly progressive dementia. It's hard to diagnose, ultimately fatal. I didn't think we'd really see any movement in it, even when I joined it. And then one thing changed, and that completely changed the field. And that was that we actually had a clinical diagnostic biomarker. And now the same thing's happening with Alzheimer's disease. And now we have clinical uses of amyloid PET, plasma p-tau, and I think that that is going to really help accelerate all the different discoveries, like treatments, but also understanding what the heck Alzheimer's is. I think the more and more we're in these fields, the more and more I think we question what is Alzheimer's disease. But being able to detect it reliably and manipulate it with drugs like the new monoclonal antibodies allows you to actually learn a lot more about a disease. And as far as locally, I'm going to let Dr. Pillai talk about his most recent exciting thing that he did. But we have a lot of people in the Cleveland area that are interested in neurodegenerative diseases as a whole. So that includes Alzheimer's disease, which is very important. But I think also very importantly, it's diseases adjacent to Alzheimer's disease, things like prion disease, frontal temporal dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies, because oftentimes you learn from one disease and you apply it to another disease. And I think having that mixture of interests in our clinical and research community is really helpful.
Great, thank you. I was just talking with a former colleague today how I have been with the Alzheimer's Association since 2014. And at that point in time, we said it's the only leading cause of death in the top 10 with no way to prevent it, treat it, or cure it. And we don't say that anymore, and I'm going to turn it over to these people to kind of talk more about what's going on. So Dr. Pillai, we're so fortunate to have one of only 36 national Alzheimer's disease research centers here in the Cleveland area. Can you speak to the importance of collaboration in the studies that you're currently working on here locally?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to echo what Brian said. Thank you for being here tonight and spending your evening with us. It means a whole lot. It tells you how much you care about this area and what you want to know. And you are among a group of people who feel the same way. So I think something good is going to come out of this. The Cleveland Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, I don't know if you've heard about that. It is an NIH or National Institute of Health sponsored a grant to the Cleveland institutions. So all the major Cleveland institutions, Case, University Hospitals, the VA, Metro Health, and Cleveland Clinic come together to run this Cleveland Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. There are 35 of them across the country, and Cleveland is fortunate to have one. We got one in 2019. We used to have one of the same centers maybe 2 decades ago, and we lost it because of the competitive process. We have to continuously show innovation, new things we're doing, how much we can impact the field. And right now, Cleveland is in the midst of things, having a functioning Alzheimer's Disease Research Center that's really making a difference. Alzheimer's Disease Research Center started in 1980s. And the reason it started in 1980s was that previous to that, Alzheimer's was thought to, disease was thought to be something that affects only people in middle age. What happened as you get older was considered to be senile dementia. We did not know that senile dementia, whatever happens in your older age, actually is the same pathology that happens in people in the 50s. So this switch happened in the 80s, and that prompted the institution of Alzheimer's disease research centers across the country to basically, get people involved and track them over a period of time as to what is happening with them. How are things changing? And that way, all the knowledge that we have gained over the last 3 decades have helped us to come to this point to, one, diagnose this disease very accurately. So as Dr. Appleby mentioned, the fact that things are accelerating now. Things are accelerating now because they've been incubating for the last 30 years. A lot of thought and activity and background work has gone in to get here. And our job of the Cleveland Alzheimer's Disease Research Center is to incubate the next generation of breakthroughs that are going to happen. Any kind of incubation, just like you make choices in life, you don't just walk one day morning and make it. You've been kind of mulling over it over a period of time. You need to develop depth of knowledge, you need to develop perspective, you need to develop collaborations, and all those things happen through centers like Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. And this is a network of centers across the nation. People talk, collaborate, share ideas, and bring scale to whatever we're doing. So it's not a small local thing. All insights that are happening that are being shared can be scaled across time. So this is the largest network in the world where you can share discoveries and scale across and improve impact of the different things that are happening. And Cleveland is now part of the party. We are going to make a strong contribution to that.
Great, thank you. This is actually Dr. Weber's first trip to Cleveland. So we were bragging earlier about our health systems in Cleveland and the collaboration we have here. We're so fortunate to have the CADRC, and they've been such a great partner with the Alzheimer's Association. So Dr. Weber, please speak to the association's leadership in convening the global scientific community and key takeaways from our recent Alzheimer's Association International Conference.
That's great. Yes, thanks, Mary, very much for the intro, and thanks for having me here. This is really an honor to be here with you all, and very exciting to get out into our community settings and meet our constituents and share with you a lot of the exciting stuff that's happening. I feel like we get to live this and see it every day, and having this opportunity to share with you some of the things that are, I think, really groundbreaking and are moving the needle doesn't always make the headlines, and this is an opportunity to come and share about this with you. So one of the things I just want to say about my role at the association, so I work on the medical science team that helps I help run events and work groups and other initiatives, consortia that all help advance dementia science. And the consortia that I run are typically a mix of industry, our for-profit sector, our academic institutions. Yeah.
You can take this one too, if that's easy enough.
All right, how about this? Does that have a And so it's the industry, it's the for-profit sector, it's the academic institutions, our government scientists from the FDA, NIH, and global organizations too, like Health Canada, the EMA. And it's under the leadership of the Alzheimer's Association that we convene all these different groups, these companies, and help advance dementia science. And I mention that just because the more we learn about how complicated this disease is, it's becoming pretty clear that there isn't going to be a single person, company, single solution. It's going to take a team effort. And the association really is really good at convening all of these different entities. So that's what a big part of my role is in what I do. And there is so much happening. There's so much research. As Mary mentioned, recently we had our Alzheimer's Association's International Conference that was in Toronto this year, and we had over 8,000 attendees, plus several more thousand on virtual as well. So the amount of science that was presented was incredible. Lots of conversations, things that were happening, a lot of convenings. And one of the special things about AAIC, in addition to all the science that's being presented, is that the association, we take great care to make sure that we make the conference accessible to people, not just the senior leaders in the field, but also our early career scientists, the ones that are going to be our next generation of physicians and researchers. So we make AAIC very accessible from a financial point of view, but we also run it in a way that it provides lots of networking opportunities for our senior scientists to interact with our early career researchers. So it's a really good conference, so much great science, and I just wanted to share a few things that I think were sort of somewhat brought up at AAIC and some of the things that I'm also excited about in the field right now. And they happen to fall into buckets of early detection, it's lifestyle and risk management, early detection, and treatments. So those are kind of the big buckets. And when you think about risk and risk reduction, I mean, we know more today than ever before about ways to manage risk for cognitive decline. And there's a lot of research happening that's helping put numbers, evidence behind what we know are effective strategies. And some of you may have heard of a study called US Pointer that the Alzheimer's Association funded and now is seeing through to completion, which is really exciting. And the top line results were read out at our AAIC conference in Toronto. Brief background, US Pointer is a 2-year study where we had over 2,100 individuals who were at risk for developing Alzheimer's enter US Pointer and were placed into one of 2 groups these groups engaged in different lifestyle modification programs that included nutritional changes, exercise, social and cognitive stimulation, and we followed these folks for a couple of years. And the really exciting part is that they're finished. They finished about 6 months ago, and we've been scrambling to analyze all the data so that we had it ready to report top-line data at AAIC. And there were a couple of really good findings that came out in this top-line data. Number one, these interventions slowed cognitive decline. So people had, on some of the cognitive measures, that found out that people had, say, like up 1 to 2 years of cognitive preservation. And also, we found that engaging in these behaviors, these exercise programs, these nutritional changes, the adherence to these programs was over 90%. And we were shooting for 80, would have been good, but it was 90%. And just by way of a little more detail, the 2 groups that people were in, everybody had access to the same type of interventions, but there was one group called a structured group and another group that was sort of on their own. And they had all the same information, but they didn't have as many check-ins and accountability for the results of US Pointer. So both groups, lots of great adherence, and the structured group actually had a slightly higher, but significantly better response. So, also with US Pointer, there were several sub-studies. So there's a lot more data to come. There was an imaging sub-study, so we've got tons of PET scans, and lots of brain scans. We have lots of fluid biomarkers, a lot of blood and CSF that's going to be analyzed. There was a sleep sub-study. There was a gut microbiome study. All of that data is also being researched right now that we hope to read out and will be presented at the upcoming CTAD conference in San Diego, Clinical Trials in Alzheimer's Disease. So I think all of this with US Pointer is really important because the future of treating Alzheimer's is likely to be a combination of lifestyle intervention and drugs. It's not going to be one or the other. Again, more complicated, the more we learn about how complicated this disease is, we realize it's going to take a combination of approaches, and US Pointer just gave us a huge push in that direction. Early detection. So what's really exciting about being able to detect this disease early now is that we can intervene. It provides intervention opportunities early on, even before people have symptoms. And this is really where we see the potential for blood tests. So some of you may have heard about blood tests that are making their way now. They're being used extensively in research and are slowly being more common in clinical settings now. In fact, one of the exciting pieces of news back in May, the FDA cleared the first blood test ever from a company called Fujirebio, and it measures a ratio of amyloid and tau that are in your brain and they're detectable in the blood. And what we're really excited about with this new test, and now being cleared by the FDA. By the way, the nomenclature is subtle, but you may notice I did say cleared. Devices, tests are cleared, drugs are approved. That's the distinction. So with this new cleared test, what we're hoping is it sparks a lot of dialogue in the clinical community about where is this test important, so that we can test to use the right test in the right individual at the right stage of the disease. Because all of this biomarker development that you heard talked about earlier is helping inform what the biology of the disease is and how early it starts, way before you actually see the symptoms of it, the memory decline, the functional impact. And these blood-based biomarkers are now going to help determine where we may actually be able to intervene at these earlier points. And one of the things the association is spearheading is we are going gangbusters right now on what we call guideline development. And right now, also at AAIC, we announced the publication of our blood-based biomarker guidelines, which is going to help physicians understand and utilize these blood-based biomarkers of what patients and what points of the disease. So there's a lot more to come on those guidelines. We're still developing them. We designed them as sort of, here's the initial guideline, and we're going to be continually adding to it when new tests are approved and put out there, so that we can inform the physician community of where these tests are appropriate. All right, lastly, treatments. We are truly in a new era with treatments right now for Alzheimer's disease. And I'm sure many of you are aware that we've got 2 FDA-approved monoclonal antibodies that remove amyloid plaques from the brain. Amyloid, and the thing is though, these drugs are for people who are in the early stages of the disease, and it doesn't cure the disease, it just slows down the progress of it. So we can do way better. And there's a lot of investing that the Alzheimer's Association and many other organizations are doing to help diversify the pipeline and make sure that we don't leave any stone unturned when it comes to what therapeutic targets and mechanisms of action that we should be looking at in the brain to help slow this disease down. And I guess overall, I could go on about the different programs that we have, funding mechanisms at the Alzheimer's Association. But we do have a lot. If you have questions about that, you can come ask me later. But I think amyloid and tau are just a couple of therapeutic targets that seem to get a lot of attention. But right now, there are over 130 unique compounds that are currently in clinical trials here in the United States. And what I'm hopeful about is that in the hopefully near future, is that there will be enough data to suggest that maybe a combination of some of these drugs could slow the disease to a stop. And in essence, I would probably call that a cure. So I don't think we're that far off. I'm not going to put a timeline on that, but there's so much research that's happening right now that is getting us in that area. All right, with that, I'll stop and turn it back over.
It's the second time I heard that today, and I'm still just amazed. Again, it's, having been involved in this personally, professionally, it's amazing to hear all that's going on. I appreciate everyone that submitted questions ahead of time. We're gonna get to some of those right now. If we don't get to your question, we will be sure to follow up with an answer. We'll confer with our panel here to make sure that we leave room for questions in the room as well. So start thinking about questions that you have for the panel. A couple pre-submitted questions we got. So are there any new treatments specific for early onset Alzheimer's to reduce the progression?
So, depends what you mean by early onset. I'm assuming you mean early in life, not early stage. I think it's a great question because if you look at clinical trials, oftentimes this population is left out because they're too young. The association's done a lot to remedy that, and I think more and more clinical studies are going to include younger people. But right now, all the Alzheimer's specific treatments are regardless of age of onset. However, as Dr. Weber said, these treatments that we have that remove amyloid from the brain, the two approved by the FDA, are for early symptomatic people. So these are people that have some symptoms. They have confirmation that they have Alzheimer's through some type of test, whether it be a blood test or amyloid PET or a spinal fluid test. I think the real value of treatment will be kind of exploiting the fact that this is a very chronic disease. It starts a decade or more before you see any symptoms. If we can identify people that have the disease but not the symptoms and have a combination approach, then we can prevent or delay the onset. And I would consider that a cure.
Yeah, I think to add to Dr. Appleby's comments, I think having, it's about interventions at that early stage. And like you had said, if we can prevent the pathology from even developing at the early asymptomatic phases, even before there's memory loss or functional decline, we can then prevent new cases of dementia. So that in essence becomes part of the overall lessons of a cure. And I also think that the perception, something that you guys, I forget which one of you had mentioned it before, but about the perception of the disease and who gets it and at what stage do we want to identify it and treat it is also evolving very rapidly now in the context of these biomarkers, both imaging and fluid biomarkers that are helping understand who has the pathology before you have symptoms. Because up until maybe 10 years ago, we could only diagnose people by their cognitive symptoms. Well, we're moving beyond that now and can go much earlier. And this is no longer a disease of the elderly. So we need to kind of shift our thinking, which also will shift our policy decisions too, and what resources we're going to put into medical facilities and other areas of prevention, which again, kind of bringing it back to US Pointer, that's the first of, I think, many studies that are going to start to put the pieces of that puzzle together of prevention and risk management and lifestyle interventions to make sure that if you are at risk, there are interventions that can be done that are not drug related, but it's a combination approach. So that's my thoughts on early intervention and how we view the disease.
Thank you. Why do we think hearing loss causes Alzheimer's?
So the Lancet Commission, probably, I think it was 10 plus years ago, they came out with their original, I have a beautiful slide that I'm envisioning and I'm trying to speak to you right now. This Lancet Commission identified, I think, 9 risk factors. And they added on over the years. And just last year, I think it was in 2024, they added hearing loss as well. So this is risk for dementia, not Alzheimer's, but dementia. And there are studies that are happening right now on hearing loss. And what they're all showing is that it's something that needs to be looked at early and treated. And I think there's, again, thinking about policy changes and resources, getting folks hearing aids to make sure that hearing loss isn't a problem that creates social isolation, which is another risk factor for Alzheimer's and dementia. And there was actually a physician I heard on a podcast recently, I forget, I think he was at Johns Hopkins, and he was describing a mechanism of more of a physiological mechanism of when the eardrum is not communicating those signals into the brain. It's kind of a use it or lose it philosophy that when that is cut off now and you're no longer, hitting the brain with that kind of stimulation and activating that part of the brain that's processing the hearing, it starts to shut down. And then that can also become it starts affecting neighboring areas of the brain as well. So there's a couple of things. It's social isolation and some of the physiological characteristics that are responsible for it. So yes, if you are experiencing any hearing loss, please talk to your doctor about it.
Can you discuss some research studies regarding lithium orotate to treat Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah, that was a really interesting finding. And from what I remember about the study, a couple of things. Number one, it's very early days with this, and these were animal studies. So this was a mouse study. And what they're looking at is when there is a lithium deficiency, it did happen to correlate with the plaque, the amyloid plaque levels. And that's where they're now seeing, hey, this is a really interesting finding. And we know a lot about lithium in treating mental health. Now we're seeing a potential application with some of the physiology, the pathophysiology of Alzheimer's. So again, early days, these are mouse models, and making the transition from what we would call preclinical animal studies to human studies, that's a tough jump to make for so many compounds, and that's where a lot of our drugs don't quite make it. They don't respond the same way in humans as they do in animals. So I'm optimistic. I think it'll be really exciting to see what happens with this research and where it goes, but it's early days, and we'll see.
Yeah, I think this all started 15, 20 years ago. People were interested in lithium because it actually interferes with the enzyme that causes the tau protein to get phosphorylated and cause tangles. And there's a certain group of frontotemporal dementias where tau is the pathology. So it wasn't successful there. So then people wanted to try it with Alzheimer's, which also includes tau and the other protein. But it may be that once you address amyloid, that maybe you can address tau, like the combination therapy that you're talking about.
For that, a quick comment that, you know, the interest in lithium has gone through a lot of cycles.
That's not intended, right?
Yeah, so currently it's getting a lot of attention, but I mean, it has gone through a few decades of interest, so we're waiting to see what happens now again.
It speaks to the 130 different things we're looking at that could, get us to a treatment and a cure.
And also no stone unturned,
Right.
where we are making sure that we're understanding, well, what exactly are we looking at here? And what are these other therapeutic targets that might be of interest and have some role in how we get to the amyloid plaques and the tau tangles.
We're gonna open up to the questions in the room now, so if you have a question, raise your hand, and we're probably gonna have you project a little bit, and have our panel respond.
Yeah, I have two questions. Actually, if you are at risk for Alzheimer's because someone in your family, like my mother, had it, why can't everyone get a blood-based biomarker or imaging for preventative purposes? Is it a cost issue, or what is the issue there? And then my follow-up question is there a link between inflammation of the body and the development of Alzheimer's?
It's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I know it's coming from a place of clear uncertainty in the face of wanting to do the right thing for you. So I really appreciate that, and it makes total sense, and I would want to know the answer to that. To really answer this question, though, you really need to understand the course of changes in the brain that was alluded to earlier. That when a person has symptoms, the changes that are going on in the brain, whether it's amyloid or whether it's tau or it's inflammation, some of these changes has been shown to predate symptoms by up to 15, 18 years or so. So which means that even for a person who is completely normal, those changes are going on. So if you were to pick somebody who's cognitively normal and do a test, it's possible that it might show there are changes related to Alzheimer's, like changes going on in the brain. You would want to make the diagnosis as well, you're going to get Alzheimer's disease for sure. or, well, this is something that's going to happen. But that is a false premise, because we also know people who have significant amount of amyloid or tau changes in the brain who are still functionally doing very well for maybe, and we don't know how long they're gonna do well, because 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Do you wanna live in that uncertainty of not knowing what is the time course of changes to expect? So I think that having this additional piece of information is not going to give you a new treatment option right now. It might change in the future, but right now you are the perfect person to be in a research study. Like, for example, the one at the Cleveland Alzheimer's Disease Research Center is doing, bringing in people who consider themselves at risk because of family history, being tracked over a period of time. And if things do change, and if there is a point of intervention, you get the best care right away. So you're not missing out on anything. You're missing out on facing uncertainty without a clear plan of action. The role of inflammation is very important. It's coming up more and more. And that's actually one of the areas of the study in the Cleveland Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, to try to understand how this interacts and how does it impact outcomes. But this is an evolving field. You definitely hear a lot more about it.
Inflammation.
Yeah, but it's one of my areas of study. That's what I was saying. I should talk about it. But I think I just mentioned it's a hot developing area. So I think, being in a research study would be my suggestion.
And just to add to some of these comments so far about, a lot of times we don't, just because you have a head full of amyloid does not mean you will go on to develop dementia due to Alzheimer's. So I think that's one of the things that we are really trying hard to figure out right now is who are the progressors, who does have the pathology and then goes on to develop is on that path to developing Alzheimer's dementia, or maybe another form of cause of dementia. So I think that's a big part of where I see a gap in our research. And I think a lot of the research that's happening now, especially like in our ALZNet treatment network. So the Alzheimer's Association has started ALZNet, which is it's a study that is it's happening here in the US. We probably have about 150 sites that are enrolling now, over 3,000 people who are on any of the FDA approved treatments right now for Alzheimer's. So if you have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's and you're on an FDA approved treatment, we are looking to enroll those people into ALZNet. Why? So we can follow them longitudinally in a real world setting and have more answers to these unanswered questions of how people progress, either while they're on the drug or not. And again, and they don't have to be on one of the anti-amyloids to be in ALZNet. Sometimes just having an MCI diagnosis and being on one of the acetylcholinesterase inhibitors, which don't change the disease at all, those people are also in ALZNet. So again, we're trying to find out who progresses and under what real world circumstances they perform. Because in clinical trials, you have this very carefully curated cohort that has been screened out. They call it a screening visit, and then you get randomized into the study. Well, that screening visit means that you have to have a very particular set of criteria, met a certain criteria, and not have a lot of other things, and that's what gets you into clinical trial. Well, the real world, when people are on medications, is much messier, and it's a lot different. People have comorbidities and a lot of other uncontrolled health conditions that could potentially affect treatment response and safety, and that's what we're trying to measure as well. And I think all of that is going to help inform who we test at what stage in the disease as early as possible so that we can get them into an appropriate patient care pathway.
When past family had some form of dementia, we call it Alzheimer's. We referred to it as Alzheimer's 30 years ago, and my mother, my aunt, my cousin all had some kind of dementia. You use the word difference between dementia and Alzheimer's. They didn't know it was Alzheimer's without doing an autopsy, which they didn't do. So, you know, the history that I personally talk about is Alzheimer's, but I have no idea what they had. So going forward, and when you talk about the timeline of the various treatments and approaches, the timeline is quite different for me in my late seventies than it is for somebody in 55 or 35 or whatever. So the timeline gets more important. So I think I might have Alzheimer's in the family history. I don't really know, but the timeline of where things are going, I'm interested in faster rather than slow. So what might be practical in the next few years in terms of, you know, diagnosing? I know the blood tests are coming, but beyond that, the treatments that you're talking about, are they something that would be appropriate for somebody in the next couple of years, or are we talking about 10, 15 years from now?
So let me kind of rephrase the question so I understand that. For the first concern you raised was the fact that there was a family history, some form of dementia, you're not exactly sure. But right now, you would like to know what can be done, you know, in the timeline that you're facing that can maximize your ability to maintain cognitive function.
Yes.
I think, I mean, that's a great question. The first thing is that, you know, you have to kind of optimize your chances. And all the information we have right now, I think is pointing to the fact that your lifestyle choices are going to be the number one thing you can do. So the point of study that you mentioned about making sure that your lifestyle is aligned with what we know that maintains your cognitive function. I mean, it's very hard, as you said, people who are not having a structured approach to those things are not able to get the most benefit from that.
And after 77 years, you've kind of formed what you're doing.
Yeah, so
Change very easily.
that tells you how badly you want to maintain that. So that's where you have to put your investment in, to make sure that this is the pathway that you're setting up for yourself. Secondly, if you are concerned significantly about family history, again, as I mentioned earlier, being in a research study allows you to be tracked much more closely, so that if anything concerning comes up, you are you're having access to the best treatment right away. So that way you kind of cover both bases. You're doing everything, and in case things don't work out, you are going to have the best options right away.
You know, when you talk about funding issues, I went through trying to fund and help fund family care in facilities that were self-paid for a while and then eventually became Medicaid's responsibility when they exhausted every asset they had. So the government has to realize what the cost of these things are for taking care of people that go through these and can't live in a normal home, performing normal daily duties as they get older. I can't imagine that the funding doesn't make a lot more sense to fund research and get it done than it does taking care of these people when they're sick and they can't do it. And the lifestyle for those people, the quality of life is just totally different. So I can't imagine that's not being presented very aggressively to let these people know what the cost is.
That particular point is very valid. At my spring research roundtable meeting, we did a deep 2-day dive on what we're now calling stage 1 and stage 2 Alzheimer's. So I'm not sure if anyone's heard it, didn't really make much headlines, but the Alzheimer's Association about 6-8 months ago published revised staging criteria for Alzheimer's. So we have a numeric staging system now that we are going to be very creating a lot of awareness with health systems and physicians groups, because it's from 0 to 6. So it's a numeric staging like other diseases like cancer. So stage 1 and 2, stage 0 is you have no symptoms at all. Everything's normal. Stage 1 is you have biomarker evidence. So maybe you got a PET scan or you've got a blood test that shows the pathology, but you have no symptoms. Stage 2 is where you now start to experience some memory loss, but you're still completely independent. We had a 2-day deep dive on stages 1 and 2 on what are the biomarkers we want to be looking at this very early stage of the disease. What are treatment modalities that are going to be effective? Kind of like what you were saying about looking earlier and earlier. And we also had a session on the economics of this, because that also has to be looked into. And from what I recall, we had Jeff Joyce from USC come in, and I remember one of the things he said, to your point, where unlike other countries around the world, the US is unique in that Alzheimer's and other causes of dementia is a uniquely, it's a Medicare problem. Because of the age at which you start collecting benefits and transition into the Medicare system. However, the private payers, well, we need to be, I'm paraphrasing now from what he had said, but we need to engage them a little bit better to make sure that the resources are there and all the preventative healthcare that could potentially put you in a better position when you do cross that threshold over to a Medicare system, that you're not, because you're right, otherwise Medicare can't pay for everything at the rate we're going. We do need to engage people a little bit earlier on what other things can we do and what other aspects of the private payer system can they engage and help promote as well.
So following up on kind of the funding, so we saw at AAIC decades of research has really blossomed in that, right? But we also know that there's threats to NIH funding, right? Funding that's been potentially frozen or cut. So I'd like you to kind of comment on that and what the association is trying to do about that in general. And then we just recently announced a partnership with the Michael J. Fox Parkinson's Foundation to provide bridge funding to do critical research. So maybe some words specific to that, as well as concerns on the general research state of play.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Because this is an area that we are watching very, very carefully, as you know, we are dependent on philanthropic dollars, not NIH dollars, but we work with a lot of institutions that are dependent on those dollars. In general, and I'm not privy to the details of those discussions that happen at our more senior leadership level, but our leadership has met with Dr. Bhattacharya, the new head of the NIH, and has kept a very close watch on the funding of Alzheimer's and all things cognitive impairment related. And I can share with you that it is still a priority, bipartisan, and we're looking pretty good with this particular disease state, unlike some of the other diseases that have seen more significant cuts. And one of the ways that the association is helping, because there have been some cuts, and one of the ways that we're helping advance that is, like you had said, we are partnering with the Michael J. Fox Foundation to provide gap funding for when funding was cut or ran out or not renewed, whatever the reason was, that we can help provide some of that money. And we're two nonprofits that can only fill so many holes or gaps, but we are trying to do that as well. Because I think to your point earlier about how long the research takes, I mean, the stuff that we're talking about right here on stage right now is standing on the shoulders of research that started 1, 2, 3 decades ago. There was a great slide at AAIC in one of our plenaries where I remember the presenter had up there, it was a new monoclonal antibody that was being developed, and she had a slide that showed there was a mouse with the date of like 2002, then there was another mouse in 2012, and then there was a human in 2015, and then there was another one in 2024, and it clearly illustrated how important the research is previously that we are building on to get us to this point in these discoveries that we have today.
All right, last question.
So at the beginning of the talk, Dr. Appleby was talking about how technology is growing exponentially in our medicine world. So my question to you is, how is modern technology such as that of AI and neural networks, what is that role in Alzheimer's treatment, risk reduction, and early detection? And what do you think its role will be in the future?
So I think it's like Dr. Weber was saying, the exponentiality of it is because of what happened before. And so most people think of progress and things as linear, right? But it's not. Once you build up that base, it takes off. So I think that's where the exponentiality is coming in. The AI is certainly gonna have a role. I think we haven't seen a whole lot of that yet, because it's still somewhat of a nascent field, but people are using it for things like looking at signatures on brain MRIs to see if there's any patterns that the AI can detect, but a human can't. There was a Wired article about the first AI generated drug compound. I think we're gonna see more of that. So yeah, I think we don't know yet, but obviously it'll have some effect.
Thank you so much to our panel. I just want to close out, Dr. Weber, earlier today, someone asked, what are you most excited about? And what can we tell our constituents about research? And he said, hope has been on the horizon for a long time, but now hope is here. So I hope you all feel that and learn something and are excited about the research and the direction we're going. Appreciate you all being here tonight. At this point, I'm gonna turn over back to Shauna Daly to close things out.